Hi, Vern Thiessen here with the salon for tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Roland Lines, and he's going to introduce our guests, and we're going to get on to talk about this wonderful topic. Here's Roland.
Good evening, everyone. We're ready to start our discussion, and I have with me up here, I have Marianne Holm, who is the president of LEAP, so that's Lucy's Edmonton Advocates Project. And I also have Colleen St. Clair, who is a professor of biological sciences at the University of Alberta. She works a lot with larger wildlife. I saw that you do some studies with grizzlies and train interactions with grizzlies, as well as urban coyotes and elk, I think, who live in town, residential areas. So just to start it off, before we take questions from you, if you have questions, and we hope you do, I'm just going to ask each of them just to reflect on the play, maybe some scenes that stood out to them, just briefly talk about either personally or in their professional work, what the play meant to them. So Marianne, you can go first.
Good evening, everyone. The play really resonated with me doing the work that I do with Lucy's Edmonton Advocates Project. In particular, the zookeeper and the bond that she has with the elephant. Many people believe that activists and advocates such as myself hold some hatred towards the staff that care for the animals that they're in charge of. Nothing could be further from the truth. We recognize that Lucy at the Edmonton Valley Zoo, who we advocate for, probably has developed a close bond with her keepers, and likewise them with her. So that resonated with me. And at the same time, watching Karen in the play, I wonder if Lucy's keepers feel the way Karen does and wish that she had a different life than what she actually has now. I understand that one of the keepers at the Valley Zoo has stayed on past her retirement years because she wants to be able to spend time with Lucy and be there for her. So I had empathy towards that. At the same time, looking at the marketing individual for the zoo also resonates with me, because zoos, no matter how we want to look at it, zoos exist for profit, and the animals within zoos are a commodity to many people involved with the zoo itself. So as advocates, we don't hold animosity towards the staff, but we do, of course, have concerns with the fact that the animals are treated as commodities, and that the zoos exist for the viewing public. So in other words, the habitats that the animals live in aren't as vast and as natural as they should be, because if they existed that way, then the animals would likely retreat from the public view, and then people wouldn't buy tickets. So it's important to recognize that zoos are a business, and the animals within the zoo are means to an end. And it was really highlighted well in this play that elephants themselves are a big draw for zoos. And we see it as we follow elephants and zoos across the globe. Zoos fight very hard to hang on to their elephants because they bring people through the gates. On the other hand, though, a lot of reputable zoos are now recognizing, and as they sort of showed in this play, that elephants are very intelligent, very loving, very caring, very social, and that elephants really maybe not the best fit for a zoo environment. And so we are starting to see a trend which is very positive, where zoos are starting to recognize that elephants maybe shouldn't be captive in zoos, and seeing a trend towards moving them towards sanctuary. And as an advocate for Lucy, that's certainly something that we hope for her. So that was interesting. And then of course the activists. I certainly, and none of my colleagues, light fires or do any of those kinds of things, but we merely would consider ourselves more advocates. So we're here to educate the public about the needs, in this particular case, with the needs of an elephant. And sadly, many zoos, and pretty much all zoos, cannot meet the needs of an elephant. Other animals, yes, but there's certain species like elephants, primates, orcas, that have a reduced life expectancy in zoos. They need vast spaces, they need a big social grouping, and that's something, unfortunately, that zoos cannot provide to these animals.
Thank you.
Well, there's lots to consider there, Marianne, and I found myself thinking that watching the play as well, just a lot of fresh perspectives and some familiar ones to chew on. And what I really enjoyed about the play is the really high degree of nuance and changing perspectives in its actors. Except maybe Ronnie, she didn't seem to get it. But it was really intriguing to me to see the change in perspective that Karen had, going from a fierce certainty that the zoo environment was the best one for Lucy and that her needs were being met, to questioning that, to then rejecting her own position and seeking an alternative that was just a fantasy, not achievable, and yet so sought. And I thought I saw something similar going on with Marcel, and he did a great job of expressing the juxtaposition, maybe the contradiction between the needs of the individual and the group or the population, and sort of showing how that human capacity we have and share with a few other species is something that we can manage for individuals, but not so much for groups, populations, tribes, nations. I thought it was a brilliantly constructed play to bring all of those dynamics forward, and did a really good job of exploring the nuanced, complicated perspectives of zoos as I see them. On the one hand, they do house animals in very unnatural situations that impose compromises on individuals. No question about that. On the other hand, they educate, raise awareness, raise funding for conservation efforts around the world. A lot of the really important efforts in Africa and India concerning elephants in particular are brought by the major conservation-oriented zoos of the world: San Diego, London, Chicago, Washington, were the big ones. So in my work as a conservation biologist, teaching conservation biology, I have a fair bit of exposure to the conservation work that zoos do and the shift in public awareness about the plight of animal populations that they bring. And I think the play did an honorable job of presenting multiple sides of a complex issue. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. So at this point, does anyone in the audience have a question? And I might not be able to see hands, so you can just speak out if you do.
Hi, I'm Conni. I just wanted to ask you about Marianne. I know you have traveled to elephant sanctuaries and done some work yourself, and I would just love to hear like how that happened, and just maybe obviously like the difference between Lucy and then the elephants you saw in the sanctuary. I'd love to hear about your experiences.
Yes, since I started advocating for Lucy, I just got enthralled with elephants, wanted to learn everything I possibly could about them, and undertook to do so. So by doing that, partly volunteering in one of the largest Asian elephant sanctuaries in the world, and I've done that a few winters in a row. And also had an opportunity to go to Lucy's homeland of Sri Lanka, and had the ability to talk with conservationists there, to visit an elephant orphanage there, and also to see the remaining wild Asian elephants on a couple of different safaris that I took there. This past winter, I went to Africa. I had a chance to spend time at the David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust, which is a very well-known organization that rescues orphaned elephants that are orphaned due to often poaching, sometimes human-elephant conflict. and I was able to spend time in the nursery with the baby elephants, and also time in the reintegration units where they slowly, as the elephants get older, lessen the human contact, and then eventually they get released out into the wild after they've had time to adapt and get to know some of the wild herds. One day comes, they just don't come back to the sanctuary, and they now become wild elephants again. So one thing that struck me is working in the sanctuary in particular. Many of the elephants there in the sanctuary that I volunteer at were rescued often very late in life. Working elephants that were either logging, doing the tourist trade as far as elephant trekking, running around day in and day out with tourists on their back, chained at night, abused often with bull hooks. I met quite a few elephants who were blinded intentionally by their mahouts, the people that look after them, in an attempt to control these elephants. Beaten senselessly, poorly fed, chained. When they're not working, they're basically chained and segregated from each other. I had an experience to meet an elephant that they aren't sure how old she is, but she's approaching 100 years old, anywhere between 90 and 100 years old. And she was rescued, and she survived transit to the sanctuary, over a 40-hour trip. She was very weak, she was underweight and emaciated. She had also been alone, basically her whole life as a working elephant. Even though there may be numerous elephants that are at these trekking camps or logging camps, they're segregated, they're kept separately, they're chained to trees. And this was the case with this elephant. And we hear all the time how Lucy is too sick to travel. One thing I learned very quickly when I spent time in Asia is that just does not make sense to me. The elephants there being rescued, many of them are wounded, have had broken hips, they're weak, they're skinny, they're dehydrated, and yet they survive the journeys. And these aren't journeys like we see in North America when an elephant is rescued and taken to sanctuary in a luxurious vehicle. These are elephants on open air trucks, subjected to rain during the trip, steep hills, bumpy roads, and they somehow make the journey. They're very resilient creatures. And this elephant in particular that was, over 90 years old, when she arrived, she needed some IV treatment. But within 3 days, that elephant, I was lucky enough to accompany her to the river for her first swim. And as soon as she saw the water, she literally ran. I couldn't believe how well she could move when she spotted the water. And then I thought about Lucy, who's half her age, and the effects of captivity in the zoo. Here's an elephant that's been beaten, that's been worked to the bone, that's had been people riding on her back, and yet she could move at twice the speed that Lucy can. And we know now, after years, but it maybe wasn't well known when Lucy came to Edmonton in 1977, but we now know the effects of captivity on elephants. They need vast areas to roam. Elephants roam up to 20 kilometers a day. They need soft substrates under their feet. Standing on concrete, and in Lucy's case, in snow and ice, causes damage to their feet. Elephants have extremely sensitive feet. They even depicted in the play that Karen was giving foot care to the elephant, and that's important. The feet are highly sensitive. So what ends up happening to zoo elephants is they often don't survive to even half their life expectancy that they could have in a natural environment. So things like arthritis due to a lack of exercise. They also mentioned in the play obesity. Lucy has been up to 2,000 pounds overweight, and again, due to a lack of exercise. So again, that's putting pressure on her joints. So lack of exercise, obesity putting pressure on the joints, foot disease that is common in captive elephants. In fact, all three of those conditions are not seen in wild elephants. And so those are the three common reasons that we see the premature death of elephants in zoos, and why now that we're seeing a trend with more progressive zoos recognizing this fact and willingly moving their elephants to sanctuary. So now Lucy remains as the only elephant left in a Canadian city-owned zoo, because Toronto and Calgary and years before that, Vancouver, have all moved their elephants south. So that just gives us even more push for Lucy, because we're very concerned at 43 years old. The mean life expectancy of a zoo elephant is often around 45, and you will very rarely see a zoo elephant live until 50 years old. Which brings me back to Thailand and the 90-plus-year-old elephant that we saw, despite living the hard life that she did, has lived to twice the life expectancy of a captive elephant. And that's something that I hope people will take away from what I have to say today. There's just certain animals that just don't fare well in a captive environment, and elephants would definitely be at the top of the list.
Thank you.
Other questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's denying that elephants shouldn't be held in captivity anymore and that it's not a suitable environment for them. But I'm just curious, what's stopping your organization from accepting the CASA-endorsed independent veterinarian produced report on why Lucy is such a special case as to why she should stay here? So what's stopping your organization from accepting that there has been this recommendation placed?
Well, first of all, the most recent one that you're referring to would be Dr. Cracknell, who did the most recent examination of Lucy. Actually not considered a species expert in elephants, although he has experience working with elephants. We see a real bias within the zoo veterinarians, and we see this not just in Edmonton, but we follow zoos and elephants in zoos worldwide, and we hear the exact same claims from other zoos that the elephant won't survive moving, that our elephant is unique. Those kind of claims do not just come from the Valley Zoo. We see those claims in any zoo facing pressure to move their elephants. And as far as the most recent assessment, Dr. Cracknell from the UK was responsible for a lone elephant in his zoo, Longleat Safari Park in the UK. And again, many advocates and activists are protesting the fact that Anne, the lone zoo elephant that he was responsible for the same reasons we are advocating for Lucy, elephants should not be alone. So when a vet is brought in, specifically from a zoo that keeps a lone elephant, we have some skepticism about the fairness of the examination, so to speak. And what we've always asked for is to allow a team of experts to come in and examine Lucy. And yes, of course, if we were to suggest veterinarians, they would be more likely to be on our side. If the zoo is to suggest veterinarians, they're more likely to be on their side. So to combat that issue is we've asked the city and the zoo to allow a team of experts in that can be mutually selected by the zoo and by advocacy groups to come up with a consensus as to what would be best for Lucy. That's what they did in Alaska. They brought in 11 experts to examine the elephant there named Maggie. Out of those 11 experts, only one said Maggie wouldn't survive the trip to sanctuary. Luckily, they didn't listen to the one expert, they listened to the other 10, and Maggie was successfully moved and now is thriving at Paws Sanctuary. This is 10 years later. This elephant was collapsing. They had to use cranes to get her, to lift her up inside her enclosure. She was a sick elephant, and she managed to make the trip from Alaska to California. And now, 10 years later, is living amongst other elephants and thriving. It's interesting to note that aside from Dr. Cracknell, the veterinarian that said Maggie wouldn't survive the trip is the same consultant that the Valley Zoo uses, and that's Dr. James Oosterhuis. So he has said that Lucy wouldn't survive the trip. He also said Maggie wouldn't survive the trip. So from our perspective, these are the two veterinarians that have weighed in on Lucy. One that has obviously erred in his assessment of Maggie, and the second one who has a history of keeping a lone zoo elephant. We would really like to hear from biologists, species experts that aren't affiliated with zoos. Zoos know that elephants bring people through the gates, and they're fighting like hell, excuse my language, but they're fighting to hold on to their elephants. And they're worried that if they lose their elephants, then what next? And will it affect attendance? Will it affect their livelihoods? So we'd really like to hear from outside experts not affiliated with zoos. And until that happens, we're going to continue to speak out for Lucy until such time that never happens.
You're here.
I think we have time maybe for one more question.
No, we have a couple minutes, but I wanted to ask a question.
Okay.
Yes.
I was actually, before you do, sorry, Mern, we got a question on Sunday about what the conservation role of zoos is, and our panel on Sunday couldn't really answer that. And I was hoping that maybe, Colleen, you could say a little bit about what is it that zoos do in the conservation world? Like how do they help animal conservation?
And that was my question.
Oh, how fortuitous. Sure, I'll take a stab at that happily. Well, it would be fair to say that that role has really evolved, and some of the material for this play acknowledged the early zookeeping of the Tower of London, and it was really just a freak show of these exotic animals that were unfamiliar to Londoners that could impress people. And zoos had that role primarily for centuries of just impressing people with no thought whatsoever to the welfare of the animals or the plight of their wild populations. And that's changed quite dramatically over the last, I would say, 50 years or more, where zoos have gone from being kind of this bit of a backwater in conservation relevance to really being at the forefront of a lot of conservation initiatives and changing awareness, in my estimation. I came to that perspective from a bit of skepticism. I guess I'm a bit like Karen or Marcel with my own changing perspectives on zoos, which are never really purely one perspective. I see multiple sides of the issues. Certainly, I have no trouble understanding the reason for the compassion that your group has, Marianne, and I really compliment it and condone it. Compassion is never a wasted emotion. But when we think of compassion as the limited commodity that it is, and ask ourselves to kind of tie compassion to evidence and logic, and then reassess the role of zoos in a changing world and an urbanizing world where close to 80% of the human population already lives in urban areas, and their only exposure to non-domesticated, non-urbanized animals comes in the form of zoos. And then ask ourselves, where do we each have those pivotal experiences with animals that open our hearts to caring about other species more generally? Then I think we can see the profound importance of zoos as kind of a gateway emotional experience to compassion for other species. And zoos, I think, have done a great job. Not every zoo, not every animal, not every exhibit, not every individual, but on a whole and as a progression, I think they've done a great job of stepping into that role and combining with the awe that people feel watching exotic, beautiful animals just being. They've combined that with education campaigns and fundraising efforts and research programs and support, especially for developing countries where a lot of our most exotic animals live. They've really had profound influence in all those domains. And it's no exaggeration to say, there's no bias in saying, zoos are a major contributor to global conservation of species at risk, as well as education about species at risk around the world. And that applies to elephants, along with many other really special animals that attract a lot of public attention, concern, and compassion. And zoos are playing a role in in preventing extinctions. So I guess that's a synopsis of the view I have on that issue. It's not to say that everything about zoos is great or even comfortable for me as an individual. But on the whole, I think zoos make profound contributions to the conservation of biodiversity.
I did a bit of research just playing Rami, and I'm not no expert, but the little research I did as an actor, I learned that often in zoos, like less than 3% of their budget actually goes to conserving. Most of the money goes to marketing and advertising, and I mean, zoos exist to make a profit. So, and last night, the guest we had at the other salon was just talking about the education. And I mean, I know where I stand, but to me, I'm a mother, I have an 8-year-old boy, and I won't take him to a zoo because I think ultimately, what am I teaching my son? I'm teaching him that animals exist for our entertainment and not something I don't believe. So we talk a lot about zoos and we watch a lot of, it's never been easier to watch like Planet Earth or so many incredible documentaries that make me weep. They're so beautifully shot. And so I'm just expressing my retort to your thoughts on education and conservation. This play has been, it's good. It's really fired me up as far as what I believe.
Well, I can take a couple of minutes to respond to that. Those are great points, and to hold that view and act the character that you did, it's like the pinnacle of acting. Well done. And yeah, I really enjoyed your performance too, despite thinking you didn't have quite as much nuance as Marcel and Karen. But I want to speak to the profit issue. There probably are for-profit zoos in the world, but I don't know of any. All of the major conservation-oriented zoos that I know of are non-profit societies. And it could be argued, I suppose, that that's non-profit in the same sense that the University of Alberta is non-profit. But, you know, every organization needs to raise funding to carry out its mandate as it perceives it. And that changes over time, and I think it helpfully changes because of the holding of the feet to the fire that is applied by the public and especially the most compassionate members of the public. So we might be with elephants at a stage just before it seems we've reached as a North American society with dolphins and whales. Probably lots of people here have watched Blackfish and know that general story and know that SeaWorld in California eliminated their marine mammal killer whale show following the aftermath, not just of the death of the trainer, but the profound public abhorrence when they realized what was really involved in the capture and holding of killer whales. And you maybe heard the news from last week that the Senate has passed a private member's bill to ban the keeping of dolphins and whales in Canada. And I think many of you would applaud that. And that comes from the efforts of individuals one at a time that cause whole societies to change their views. And who is hurt by this? Well, there were two organizations that still kept cetaceans in captivity in Canada, Vancouver Aquarium and the Niagara Marine World. Kind of a sideshow relic of past zoos. So I think there's room for all perspectives, and there's no question that this compassionate conservation, it's been called, is playing a huge role in raising the bar of how captive animals are treated and how wild animals are viewed the world over.
Thank you.
I know that we could talk about this all night, but I have to give the theater over to the staff here. So I want to say, first of all, thank you very much, Roland, and our guests. Want to continue the discussion in the lobby for another couple of minutes? We're welcome to do that. I just need you to clear the theater. And thank you again for coming. Tell your friends. Wait till Sunday.
Nice work, Cindy. And nice work. Thanks for work.
Watch it, it's
It's okay, I step in wet stuff all the time.
Thank you for
Thanks
coming. And if you guys want to grab a couple of those little postcards that are out there, please grab a couple. Not postcards, but they're, so yeah, grab a couple. Grab a couple. Thank you very much for coming here. Really appreciate your support.